If you've been waiting for another stimulus check, this could be the news you've been hoping for. Democrats in Congress have just reached an agreement on a relief package that includes $2,000 direct payments to Americans, plus an additional $500 boost for Social Security recipients. But before you start planning how to spend that money, there are some important details you need to know about who qualifies, when these payments might actually arrive, and what political hurdles still need to be cleared. Because while this sounds like great news on paper, the reality of getting this money into your bank account is more complicated than the headlines suggest. The Democratic proposal centers around two main components that work together as an economic stimulus strategy. The $2,000 direct payment would go to individuals earning up to $75,000 annually, with the amount gradually phasing out for higher earners and completely eliminated for those making more than $100,000. For married couples filing jointly, those thresholds jump to $150,000 and $200,000 respectively. What makes this different from previous stimulus efforts is the targeted approach to Social Security recipients. The additional $500 payment recognizes that seniors on fixed incomes have been disproportionately affected by inflation, particularly in essential categories like food, housing, and healthcare. This isn't just political theater, there's solid economic reasoning behind it. According to data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, seniors typically spend a higher percentage of their income on necessities that have seen above average price increases. While the overall inflation rate has been cooling, food prices remain elevated, and housing costs continue to strain budgets. The $500 Social Security supplement is designed to provide immediate relief, while broader economic policies work to address underlying cost pressures. The proposal also includes provisions for dependents, with families receiving an additional $500 per qualifying child. This means a family of 4 could potentially receive $5,000 total, $2,000 for each parent plus $500 for each child. For a Social Security recipient with dependents, the numbers could be even higher. Unlike some previous stimulus efforts that were essentially emergency measures, Democrats are framing this as both immediate relief and economic stimulus. The theory is that putting money directly into consumers' hands will boost spending, which supports businesses and helps maintain economic momentum. Now let's talk about the political landscape, because this is where things get complicated. While Democrats have reached internal agreement on this package, that's only half the battle. The current composition of Congress means that any major spending bill needs to navigate complex procedural hurdles and potential Republican opposition. Senate Republicans have already signaled skepticism about large-scale stimulus spending, arguing that previous relief efforts contributed to inflationary pressures. Senator Mitch McConnell's office released a statement questioning whether additional direct payments are necessary given recent improvements in employment numbers and GDP growth. They're not entirely wrong to raise these concerns. There's legitimate economic debate about the timing and scale of stimulus measures. However, Democratic leadership appears confident they can move forward using budget reconciliation procedures, which would allow them to pass the measure with a simple majority rather than the typical 60-vote threshold. This is the same process that was used for previous major spending bills, but it comes with strict limitations on what can be included. The key swing vote may come down to moderate Democrats, who have previously expressed concerns about deficit spending. Senators like Joe Manchin have been vocal about fiscal responsibility in the past, though they've also supported targeted relief measures for their constituents. What's particularly interesting is the timing. With political pressures mounting, there's incentive for Democrats to deliver tangible benefits to voters. But there's also risk if the stimulus contributes to renewed inflation concerns. It could backfire politically. The Federal Reserve has indicated it's monitoring fiscal policy developments closely, and large-scale stimulus could influence their interest rate decisions. From a purely economic standpoint, the effectiveness of this stimulus package depends on several factors that economists are actively debating. Research from the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco found that earlier direct payments were highly effective at boosting consumer spending, with recipients spending approximately 70% of their payments within the first few months. This suggests that the current proposal could inject roughly $140 billion directly into consumer spending. However, the economic environment today is different from 2020 and 2021. Unemployment is near historic lows, and consumer demand in many sectors has already recovered to pre-pandemic levels. This raises questions about whether the economy needs additional stimulus, or whether the money might be better targeted towards specific sectors facing ongoing challenges. The inflation concern is real but nuanced. While overall inflation has moderated from its peaks, core services inflation remains elevated, and housing costs continue to pressure household budgets. Some economists argue that targeted payments to lower-income households and Social Security recipients could actually be helpful in the medium term, since these groups tend to spend money on necessities rather than discretionary items. The Social Security component is particularly well designed from an economic perspective. Seniors on fixed incomes have seen their purchasing power eroded by inflation, and the $500 supplement helps restore some of that lost ground without creating broader demand pressures that might affect luxury goods or services. Let's get specific about eligibility because this is where the details really matter. The income thresholds are based on your most recent tax return, which for most people means your 2023 filing. If you haven't filed yet for 2023, the IRS would use your 2022 return. For the $2,000 payment, single filers earning up to $75,000 receive the full amount. The payment phases out gradually for higher earners, disappearing entirely at $100,000. For married couples, the phase-out begins at $150,000 and ends at $200,000. Social Security recipients qualify for the additional $500 regardless of their other income, as long as they're receiving benefits. This includes Social Security retirement benefits, disability benefits, and supplemental security income. The key requirement is that you must be actively receiving benefits as of the bill's enactment date. The timeline for payments is where things get murky. If the bill passes in its current form, the Treasury Department estimates it would take 2-3 weeks to begin processing payments for people who already have direct deposit information on file with the IRS. Paper checks would follow 4-6 weeks later, with possible delays for people whose addresses have changed or who haven't filed recent tax returns. Social Security recipients might actually receive their payments faster, since the Social Security Administration already has established payment systems and direct deposit arrangements for most beneficiaries. Now, let me share some healthy skepticism about this entire situation. While the proposal sounds generous and well-intentioned, there are several concerns worth considering. First, the timing feels politically convenient. Major stimulus announcements often coincide with political pressure rather than clear economic necessity. We're not in a recession, unemployment is low, and consumer spending has been relatively robust. This raises questions about whether the stimulus is addressing genuine economic need or primarily serving political objectives. Second, the fiscal implications are substantial. Adding roughly $200 billion to federal spending at a time when the national debt is already at historic levels requires serious consideration of long-term consequences. While supporters argue that economic growth will offset the costs, that's not guaranteed, and the burden ultimately falls on future taxpayers. Third, there's implementation risk. Previous stimulus efforts faced significant challenges with fraud, processing delays, and payments going to incorrect addresses. The IRS and Treasury Department have improved their systems, but large-scale payment programs always carry operational risks. That said, there are legitimate arguments for targeted relief, particularly for Social Security recipients who have seen their purchasing power diminished by inflation. The question is whether this specific approach is the most effective use of taxpayer resources. So what should you actually do with this information? First, don't spend money you don't have yet. While democratic agreement is a significant step, this proposal still needs to clear several hurdles before becoming law. Even if it passes quickly, there will be weeks between enactment and actual payments. If you think you might qualify, make sure your information is up to date with the IRS. File your 2023 tax return if you haven't already, and ensure your direct deposit information is current. This will help speed up payment processing if and when the stimulus is approved. For Social Security recipients, you're in a slightly better position since your information is already in government systems. However, it's still worth verifying that your address and banking information are current with the Social Security Administration. Consider how this fits into your overall financial situation. If you're struggling with essential expenses, the stimulus could provide meaningful relief. If you're financially stable, think about whether the money might be better saved or invested rather than spent immediately. Here's my bottom line assessment. While the Democratic stimulus proposal offers real money to millions of Americans, its path to becoming law is far from certain, and its economic necessity is debatable. The $2,000 payments and $500 Social Security supplements would provide meaningful relief to many households, particularly those still struggling with elevated costs for essentials. The targeting seems reasonably well designed to focus benefits on lower and middle-income Americans, who are most likely to spend the money quickly. However, the political and economic environment is different from previous stimulus efforts. We're not in crisis mode, which makes the case for large-scale spending harder to justify. The inflation risks, while manageable, are real and could have lasting consequences. My prediction? Some version of this proposal will likely pass, but it may be smaller in scope than the current version. The political incentives for Democrats to deliver something are strong, but fiscal concerns and procedural hurdles will probably force compromises. For now, treat this as a possibility rather than a certainty. Don't make financial decisions based on money you might receive, and stay informed about developments in Washington. The next few weeks should provide much more clarity about whether this stimulus becomes reality or remains a political talking point.